On today's episode of Let's Talk Drones, we are reviewing two FPV batteries courtesy of Tattu. So thank you to the folks over at Tattu for sending us over two 1400 milliamp hour batteries and two 1200 milliamp hour batteries. And if you don't know what milliamp hours are, when it relates to FPV batteries, essentially think of it this way. It's how much juice is in each battery. So 1200 obviously is lower capacity than 1400, but what we really want to look at is the discharge rate as well. On the 1400 milliamp hour batteries, we've got a 150C discharge rate, so you're going to get a lot of juice from this battery to the drone very quickly. On this one, it's also the 1200 150Cs, so that means you're going to get a lot of juice out of the battery to the drone as quickly as possible, which means that these are suited for freestyle drones, and that's what we have here today in the form of the GEPRC Mark 5. We're going to be strapping these to the back of that to see just how long the flight times are on these R-Line Tattu batteries. Without further ado, let's talk drones. What's up? It's Chris, the Drone Geek, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Drones. Let's Talk Drones is brought to you by Tattu. These guys make fantastic FPV batteries. I've been flying them since before Tattu reached out to have us review these batteries we're going to review today. I love Tattu FPV batteries. They're reliable. They give you plenty of flight time, which is really hard to come by in the FPV world. I've not had any major incidents using Tattu batteries with my FPV drones. Super reliable product. Make sure you check them out. You can get them at Get FPV, GEPRC. You can get them at Beta FPV. They're available just about everywhere. Tattu batteries. I swear by these things. Okay, so a little bit of a spoiler about how I feel about Tattu and their products as a whole. I really like Tattu. I've been flying Tattu batteries since I started flying more traditional FPV quads. I've been using them on my Cinelog 35. I've been using them on my Mark 5. I've been using them on just about any drone that I can use them on. I love how dependable they are, the reliable they are, and just how much power and efficiency you get in your flight using Tattu batteries. I don't know what they do differently over there, but they have some really fantastic products that I hang my hat on every single time. What we're looking at today are these two different types of batteries. We've got our 1400s over here, we've got our 1200s over here. Normally, I would fly the 1200s on a Cinewhoop, and I'd fly the 1400s or larger on a freestyle quad. However, unfortunately, the Cinelog 35 is out of commission because the DJI FPV radio that I have broke in transport. When I was transporting it back from Louisiana for one of the jobs that I did for a client down there, it unfortunately got damaged in transit. So I have to get that repaired before I can fly the Cinelog 35. So we're just gonna be flying these on the Mark 5. So we're really gonna be interested to see how these 1200s do on that because they're a little bit lower capacity and they're gonna be on a drone that demands more power. Now it's got the same discharge rate. Both sets of batteries have the same discharge rate, 150C. So it's going to be supplying power to the drone plenty. I mean, the drone's going to be fine in terms of the power it needs to actually fly efficiently. What I'll be interested to see are the differences in flight times and the maximum flight times we get on each set of batteries. So without further ado, let's get the Mark 5 up in the air. We're going to start with the 1200s because I'm really anxious to see how these do. How's this going to fare on a freestyle drone? Let's find out. We've got our 1200 on board our Mark 5. When I fly the Mark 5, I usually fly a 1550 milliamp hour battery, and I'm good for anywhere between 8 and 12 minutes, depending upon how aggressively I'm flying. So at 1550 milliamp hours, we get between 8 and 12 minutes. Let's just say 10 for the sake of averages. We're looking to get as close to 10 minutes as possible with this. This is going to be off by maybe a second or two, but we'll go ahead and arm the drone. And we'll hit start. All right, here we go. So we're just gonna glide through the park here. I really like this area because Jersey Shore is not a very big community, so it's usually not super busy here, unless it's the summertime. But I have lots of places to fly around without a lot of people walking around, and it's just wide open too, so I can really work on stunts, tricks, things like that. So we'll go ahead, we'll drop down in here. Like I said, we do have a timer on, so I won't make you suffer through this entire flight, but we'll collect the data and then I'll show you what we're working with. So, woo, that was close, almost. Got T-boned by that siren. That would have been real bad. I think we have some kids over at the playground, so we gotta be cognizant of that. You know, what I'm noticing too is there's not a lot of battery sag when I do those flips. I went from about 23.2 volts down to about 22.2 2 or 3, I think is what I saw it drop down to. So a little bit of a zag for sure, but not enough that I'd be concerned about it. Obviously, if you're lower on battery, you want to be a little bit more conservative in your flight, but if you've got a fully juiced battery, there's no reason you can't send it. The responsiveness too. I mean, the drone plays a part of this for sure, but the responsiveness on the battery is great. You know, I can go ahead and do a dive despite the fact that I'm pretty low on battery right now, but I'll do a dive. And then I can pick it up pretty low to the ground. I probably could have gone lower, but again, I don't want to lose the only drone I have to review these batteries right now to something ticky-tacky like that. Now on that punch out I just did, I did notice some battery sag. Now obviously it's very demanding on the drone. You're giving it a lot of juice to fight a lot of gravity with not ideal surface area on the drone because I'm actually, you know, I've got maximum surface area for drag, but I dropped down from like 22.5 to about 19.1 volts there as I was punching out. So noted on that. All right, we're down to 21.9 volts. And again, these tests aren't a stress test. Typically when I do some sort of a flight time review, I'm not really aiming to do a full-on stress test. And what I mean by a stress test is I'm not pushing this battery down to nothing. I think that's actually a really poor idea, especially since these are products that are gonna be mine. So what I'm gonna do is stop at a realistic point, because it really, I wouldn't fly this thing all the way down to no juice unless it was an absolute emergency and I absolutely had to save the drone. Typically, if everything goes according to plan, I do just run it down to about 21.5 volts, and I'm almost there. I'm at 21.8. So we'll go ahead and do another lap through where we were just flying through, and then we'll bring it back and land it. And we'll see what our flight time is at as well. The 1200 milliamp hour battery on flight number 1 got 6.5 minutes roughly. So that's pretty good, not quite where we wanted it to be, but again, when you look at the capacity of this battery versus what I usually fly with the Mark V, I'm still pretty impressed at what the 1200 could do. And what I really liked, and what one characteristic that a lot of people don't look at, they look at flight time first, but they don't look at efficiency and consistency in flight. What I really liked about the 1200 milliamp hour battery, which again has less juice than the other battery that we're going to test, as well as less juice than I'm used to flying with, is that when I would punch out, when I would do power loops, when I would do any type of really aggressive acro flying, I didn't notice a lot of battery sag, which is fantastic, because that means that you have a more reliable supply of power to your drone, which means that you're less likely to just drop out of the sky due to a failure on the battery or the power system. So really impressed by the 1200 milliamp hour battery. We've got one more flight left with the other battery for this drone. But before we do that, let's go ahead and just get started on the 1400 milliamp hour battery, so we have a nice little contrast side by side. Okay, so we've got the battery on, we're rolling on our GoPro. We're gonna go ahead and we're gonna start a new timer. So we'll go ahead and reset that one, and we'll go ahead and start this one. Again, we'll have about a 2-second or so pause before we get armed. And here we go. And again, we are flying the 1400 milliamp hour battery. And it's not a noticeable difference, but you can definitely tell, like right off of the launch, I had a little bit more power coming out of the drone. And I think that that's just because it has more power to supply. Of course, I don't know that for sure. It just maybe a little bit of bias as well, knowing that we're on a larger battery, but I definitely noticed something different on the takeoff there. It might have been my confidence too. You know, first takeoff is always a little bit shaky, especially after the drone is sat for a while. And I'd say a while. I haven't flown the Mark V in about a week. So I did my safety checks and everything like that, but it's always a little shaky when you take it off for the first time, so. You know, while we're flying FPV, of course, our friend of the channel, friend at the droning company, Sam Karp, comes to mind. Really nice dude, really great dude. We've become friends very, very fast. We fly a lot together, especially FPV. And, you know, I have to credit him for my power loop abilities. I'm nowhere near as smooth as I want to be yet, but he sort of straightened the ship for me, or righted the ship for me, because before, when I did a power loop, which is what you're seeing right now, which again, not as smooth as I want it to be, but it's getting there. But before, when I do a power loop, I'd think that this was a power loop. Something like that, where I just do like a flip backwards. And it really wasn't. It was more of just like a backflip, but I incorrectly referred to it as a power loop. A power loop is where you start at one point and you basically draw as a big circle, or as close to a circle as you possibly can. So let's go ahead and let's just rip around here. You know, it really is sort of a bummer that I couldn't bring the Cinelog 35 to fly, because that would have given us a more realistic look at flight times with different types of drones. This is a freestyle drone. The discharge of the battery has more to do with that than anything, but of course you can fly this more aggressively. It's got more powerful motors. It's got a demand for more power. So it's gonna drain these batteries quicker than a Cinelog would, or a Cinewhoop would in general. And so not having it does compromise the integrity of this test just a little bit, but I suppose if you only fly freestyle, this is a good mark for what these two different battery ratings can do for you from Tattu. We are low on battery. I can hear the drone beeping at me. We're at about 20.5 volts, so we're gonna bring it back. I did drain it a little lower than I wanted to, but we also did demand a little bit more out of this battery as well, so I don't feel so bad about that. So let's go ahead and get it landed, and let's talk about what we found. Okay, so after our first flight with our 1400 milliamp hour battery from Tattu, we ended with a flight time of 7 minutes and 54 seconds, approximately. Again, I had to turn the timer off on the phone. There's a lot that played into this that may not have given us a totally accurate number, but we're off by just a few seconds. So about 7 minutes, 54 seconds, that's pretty good. Still less than what I get with the 1550 milliamp hour battery, but that's not a bad thing. All it does is reminds us that, again, that milliamp hourage on those batteries is going to tell you how much juice you're gonna have per battery. So if you have a larger milliamp hourage battery, you're gonna get more flight time on average than you will with a smaller milliamp hourage battery. Now, there is a diminishing return situation. If you get a battery that's too big for the drone that you have, it will power the drone, and some drones will be able to take off with a battery that's too big for it. However, it's going to work harder to accommodate that weight, that additional weight on the battery. So you might say to yourself, well, Chris, why, if you're flying FPV and you're flying freestyle and you want to fly really aggressively, why don't you just get like a 20,000 milliamp hour battery? They exist, but it wouldn't fit on that drone. And if it did fit on that drone, it would be much, much heavier than 1400, which means the drone's gonna have to work a lot harder, which means that we're gonna see a diminishing return on how much flight time we get. So there is a sweet spot, and it's up to you to determine what the sweet spot is, depending upon your build for your FPV drone. Whether it's a pre-built or something you build by yourself, there is going to be a sweet spot that you need to hit. And it seems like with the Mark V from GEPRC, the sweet spot is around 1500 milliamp hours. So if you get that, you're gonna get the maximum amount of flight time, which for me has been anywhere between 8 and 12 minutes, depending upon how aggressively I'm flying. Now, we're not gonna break down the last two runs on these batteries. I'm just gonna fly them, give you the data at the end, then we're gonna look at the average flight times, and I'm gonna wrap the video up back in the office. To recap, Tattu sent us 4 batteries, 2 1200 milliamp hour batteries and 2 1400 milliamp hour batteries. All 4 of those batteries had the same discharge rate of 150 C. On our first flight, we used a 1200 milliamp hour battery, and after flying around the Jersey Shore Community Park for a while, we saw a final flight time of 6 minutes, 22 seconds. Our second flight was with a 1400 milliamp hour battery, flown the same way we flew the 1200 milliamp hour battery, and once we landed, the final flight time was 7 minutes, 22 seconds. On our third flight, we switched back to a 1200 milliamp hour battery, and we flew the drone a little bit more aggressively than we did in the first flight. Our final flight time on that third flight was 5 minutes, 52 seconds. Now this is where things get interesting, because on our fourth and final flight, we flew the final 1400 milliamp hour battery, and we did fly a little bit more aggressively than we did in flight number 2. Our final flight time, though, was 5 minutes, 59 seconds. Only 7 seconds longer than what we saw in the 1200 milliamp hour battery. So that begs an obvious question. How did we see a full minute's flight time difference between flights 1 and 2 and just 7 seconds between flights 3 and 4? It boils down to one factor for me, and that's proportional aggressiveness during flight. Flights 1 and 2, if you excuse a pun, were strolls in the park. Yeah, we punched out a few times and we did some stunts, we flew acro a bit, but for the most part we stayed well below the max speed, and we also really didn't do that many aerobatic or acrobatic stunts. Flights 3 and 4, which I didn't show for the sake of keeping this video somewhat short, were a lot more aggressive. We flew at top speed most of the time, we punched out of a lot of pieces of airspace, and we also did a lot of acro stunts. I'm talking barrel rolls, power loops, S-splits, you name it. We were trying to do it with those batteries to see what the battery could tolerate. Because we weren't demanding as much power at once on flights 1 and 2, we saw a much wider gap in the flight time, almost a full minute. When it comes to flight 3 and 4, because we were asking for more power, more draw, that meant that the drones were going to have that time gap close. It's that proportional aggressiveness and the proportional performance of the batteries that causes that differentiation between flight times. And that's not the only plausible reason. Of course, you have to look at my consistency as a pilot. Was I flying consistent through every flight? And was I giving each battery the same challenges and goals and benchmarks? I would say largely I did the best I could, but it certainly was not perfect in terms of a one-to-one flight on each battery. It's very difficult to do that with FPV, and let's face it, I'm no Alex Vanover. The point of this video is not to test just the longevity of the batteries, but the overall performance, looking at battery sag, looking at their ability to handle stress and the G's that come with acro style of flight. Overall, I was very, very pleased with the performance of the Tattu batteries. I also wasn't surprised because I'd been flying Tattu for at least a year and a half at that point. But the 1400 and 1200 milliamp hour batteries with the 150C discharge rating, the R-Lines from Tattu, were fantastic. And if I had to give them a score, I'd say roughly 8.3 out of 10 for the overall performance of these batteries. I really love Tattu's products. Of course, we'd love to see more flight time out of these batteries, but that really comes down to math and science, and we did what we could with the battery tech that we have. What did you think of the performance of the batteries? Did you love them? Did you hate them? Do you have questions? Let me know down in the comments below. If you liked this video, hit the thumbs up icon down below. It'll get this video out into the algorithm to more viewers like yourself. If you really loved this video and you love drone content shot by drones, about drones, and for drone pilots, this is the channel for you. Make sure you hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and while you're at it, hit the bell icon too. You'll get a notification every time I post a new video. Until next time, I'm Chris the Drone Geek, and I am out of here. See ya!